Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Kof Vav. We learned previously that if someone sells a piece of land and he says, I'm selling you a bet kor, and let's say it's not exactly a bet kor, there is some wiggle room, up to 1 part in 24. If it's almost a bet kor, a little bit more or a little bit less, but it's off by less than 1/24th, then the sale goes through, that's fine. But if it's more, then that's significant enough that you can't call that a bet kor anymore. That was what we learned previously. Now this Mishnah is going to talk about a subcase in which the ratio is not 1 out of 24, but rather 1/6. Here's the case. Besimanav ubim sarav. Pachot mishetut higi'ah ad shetut yenakeh. If I say, I'm selling you a bet kor, but I don't just say a bet kor, I'm also pointing out the exact borders of the land. I'm pointing out the demarcations. I say, I'm selling you a bet kor. It's this land over here, from this river all the way until this marker, that stone. So you, as the buyer, saw the land, you accepted it, and therefore there's more wiggle room in this case because you accepted that land. Now, in that case, it can be off by more than 1 out of 24, but it can't be so off. What if it's like half of a bet kor? That's way off. That you can't call that a bet kor at all. So in this case, where you give the demarcations and the borders, then it can be off by up to 1/6. So if it's off of a bet kor more or less by up to 1/6, then the sale is final and you don't have to do anything about it. But if it's more than that, all the way down to 1/6, then yenakeh, you have to deduct from the price if it's more or adjust. And if it's less, so you have to adjust it, it's not a final sale. All right, that's the Mishnah. Now, the question of the Gemara is, what if it's precisely 1/6? In the Mishnah, it's not clear, right? For less than 1/6 and more, from going from above until 1/6. But what about 1/6 exactly? So we say, Itamad is a machloket about this. Rav Huna Amar, Shetut kepachot mishetut. Rav Yuda Amar, Shetut ke yoter mishetut. Rav Huna says 1/6 is the same as less than 1/6, meaning it's a final sale, precisely 1/6, it's okay. Rav Yuda says precisely 1/6 has the same law as more than 1/6, and that means you have to adjust the price to reflect what the land actually is. We explain how they each will fit their opinion into the words of the Mishnah. Rav Huna Amar, Shetut kepachot mishetut hachika Amar, pachot mishetut ushtut bichlal higi'ah, yoter mishetut yenakeh. Rav Huna, who says that 1/6 is the same law as less than 1/6, meaning it's a final sale, he will read the Mishnah as follows. If it's less than 1/6, and 1/6 exactly is included, meaning, right, less than and 1/6 inclusive, then higi'ah, it's a final sale. If it's more than that, ad shetut means more than that until, but not including 1/6, then you have to adjust it. Rav Yuda Amar Shetut keyoter mishetut hachika Amar pachot mishetut higi'ah ad shetut ushtut bichlal yenakeh. Rav Yuda says that exactly 1/6 is the same as more than 1/6, and you have to adjust the price. And here's how he will read the Mishnah. If it's off by less than 1/6, then it's a final sale, but that does not include 1/6. If it's from above down to 1/6, including 1/6 ad ve'ad bichlal, then you do have to adjust. So both of their opinions can fit well into the Mishnah. Now we have a challenge against Rav Huna from a baraita. Metibe. Besimanav ubim sarav. So this is the same case as the Mishnah. I'm selling you a bet kor, and I say, here, it's these borders, these demarcations. You see and you accept the sale, so you know what you're getting into. Then the law is pichet shetut or hotir shetut harehu kishum hadayanim higi'ah. If it ends up being less than that by 1/6 or more than that by 1/6. So we are talking about in this braita when it's off by exactly 1/6. It was a good braita to figure out the who is right. The problem is that the Batra is ambiguous because it says two things. It says it'll be the same as the assessment of judges, and also he says it's a final sale. Now, if you say it's a final sale, that would actually prove a Rav Huna. Final sale is like a 1/6 precisely, is like less than 1/6, and it's okay. So that by itself would prove it. However, the other phrase actually says the opposite. The assessment of judges applies to a case of orphans. Orphans have an estate, and something needs to be paid from the orphan's estate. They need to pay a certain debt that they have, or for example, if they have to give support to their sister, so it has to be paid, and they have to sell off some property in order to do that. It's a property of orphans, so it has to be protected. So in such a case, the judges will make an assessment of how much that property is worth, and then they will offer it on auction. But their assessment makes a big difference in how much is going to be sold for. Now, what if it turns out they made the sale, but now we find out that the judge's assessment was wrong? This land was really worth $1,000, and they said a different number. They said more, or they said less. Or really, if they said less is the bigger problem. So if they said less, if it's off by less than a sixth, then the sale goes through, it's okay. If it's more than a sixth, then it's no good. We have to reassess, and we have to adjust what the price was. If it's precisely a sixth, in the case of judges who are assessing something for orphans, then we say it's no good. Meaning, in the case of judges, precisely a sixth is like more than a sixth. So that's what we're asking. So in the case of assessment of judges, precisely 1/6 is the same law as more than a sixth. And if we focus on those words, then this is a challenge against Rava, who says precisely a sixth is like less than a sixth. But Rav Huna has a good answer. Amalach Rav Huna, v'litamich higio katane. Rav Huna says, well, if you want to read this against me, how are you going to read this word higio that says it is a final sale? The word higio actually proves my point. So I'm very happy you're actually bringing this baraita, right? According to your reading, how will you explain this baraita itself? I'll turn the question back against you. Ela kishum hadayanim velo kishum hadayanim. Rather, what you have to explain this baraita itself, it's self-contradictory. You have to say that it's like the assessment of judges in one way, but it's not like the assessment of judges in another way. It is comparing it, but it's not a full comparison. How so? Kishum hadayanim lishtut, velo kishum hadayanim dilu hatam batel mikach ve'ilu hacha higia. It's like the assessment of judges in that the ratio that would be the cutoff point is 1/6, and not 1/24, and not any other amount. Right? In this case, unlike where if you just say bet kor and it turns out to be off, so that's 1/24. But if you give a demarcation, then we're going to follow the same ratio as similar to the assessment of judges, which is also 1/6. That's what's giving. That's the comparison. That's 1/6, and not a different ratio. But it's also not exactly like the assessment of judges, because there, if it's precisely 1/6, it's no good. The whole sale is null and void, and we assess again and sell it again. Whereas here, in the case of the land, if it's precisely 1/6, it's a good sale. It's like less than 1/6, and so Rav Huna says, actually, this baraita proves my point. Next, we have a story about Rav Papa, Zaban Mehu Gabra. Rav Papa bought some land from a certain person. Amar le havya asrin gerive. The seller said, this land is 20 geriv, meaning it's big enough that you could plant 20 se'ah of grain. That's the size of the land. Meshache vela havai ela chamisra. So Rav Papa bought it, and later on he measured it and found actually it was only 15 gerive. So he complained, and they took it to court. Abaye. Amale sebarat vekabilat. Abaye ruled, sorry, Rav Papa, you saw the field, you considered it, and you accepted it anyway. You knew exactly what you were getting into. You knew the size of the field, and therefore the sale is final. Now we ask, this ruling seems to go against our Mishnah that said that if the amount of land is off by less than 1/6, it's a final sale. But if it's more than 1/6, right, more up until 1/6, then you have to adjust the price. And in this case, it was off by 5 out of 20, which is a quarter. That's bigger than 1/6, and therefore, based on our Mishnah, the price should be adjusted. So that's a question. Papa asked Abaye, why are you ruling that it's a final sale? Our Mishnah says if it's more than a 6, which it is here, then then the price should be adjusted. And the answer is Haneme lehecha delakim le begava, aval hecha dekim le begava sabar vekabil. Our Mishnah only applies where the buyer is not familiar with the land, even though the seller said, listen, I'm selling you this bet cord that goes from this tree until that stone. So he gave definite dimensions, it's true, but the buyer is not familiar with the land. He's not seeing it right now. He didn't measure it before the sale, and so he assumes that it's about a bet cord. Then, in that case, it can be off by up to a sixth. However, if you know the land, and in this case, Papa knew the land precisely, he was looking at it, and he saw it goes from here till there. So, since he knew the land and accepted it anyway, therefore the sale is final. So we see an important limitation in our Mishnah that the 1/6 is only if he gives borders, but the buyer does not know the land. But if he knows exactly what the land is, then even if it's off by a lot, nevertheless, the sale is final. V'ha esrin amar li, amar le da'adifa ke'esrin. The Papa raises one more objection to the ruling of Abaye, and he says, wait, but he told me 20, so doesn't he have to deliver 20? Right? He said so. And the answer is, no, what he meant by that is it's as good as 20. Even though this land is only 15, it will produce as much as a land that is 20 se'ah. So that's why he said 20, as good as 20, but you saw the land exactly, and you saw that whatever it was, and then you decided to measure it later, and it was 15. But since you saw the land and knew what it was, you accepted it, and the sale is final. Good. Tanya, Rabbi Yosef Omer, Hachin shechalku, kevan she'ala goral le'echad mehen, kanu kulam. My tama, Amar Rabbi Elazar, kitchilat eres Yisrael, ma techila begoral, afkan begoral. We have a braita. We're going to see how this is related to the Mishnah in a moment regarding the next case. Is going to bring this type of case together with the law of our Mishnah. So Batra teaches that according to Rabbi Yosef, if you have brothers that are dividing an estate, let's say there's 3 brothers and they want to divide an estate, so a good fair way to do so, it would be to divide into 3 parts without assigning who gets each one. And they all agree that these 3 parts are equal and they'd be willing to accept any of them. And then you draw lots for one of them, and then you would draw a lot for the other one as well. As soon as the first brother draws a lot, right, now there's sections A, B, and C, and they all agree that this is a fair division of the land, and then they'll say who's going to get A, and they draw a lot for it. Once they draw one lot, even though the others have not drawn yet, they all have acquired, their parts. So A, the first brother acquires A, and the other brothers will acquire B and C, and then between B and C, they will do that with a second lot to decide who gets B and who gets C. But the point is that after the first one is drawn, that's it. A gets his, and they collectively get B and C. They cannot say, oh, you know what? We don't like this division. We want to undo it. And no, it happens automatically. My Tama, what is the source? So the Rabbi Elazar says it's like the original division of Eretz Yisrael. Just like the original division was with a lottery, so too here also is with a lottery. How are they to divide the land of Israel between the 12 tribes in a fair way? So Yehoshua made a lottery, and he assigned each plot to each shevet, done by the lottery, and that way they knew it was fair. Therefore, the lottery that was done in the initial settlement of the land of Israel is a model. And just like there, as soon as they picked one, so that's it. This one shevet gets that piece of land, and you can't have all the other tribes that come and say, oh no, we want to redo the whole thing from the beginning. That's it. They get their land, and all the rest of the land is now designated for everybody else, and it's acquired by them. And then so to the next one, and so on. So the lottery itself becomes a designation not only for the person who won that lottery, but even for everybody else who thereby acquire the rest of the land besides that one parcel. But now we ask a question about this derivation that Rabbi Elazar said. So are you going to say that just like when the tribes divided the land of Israel, it was done with a box that they put all the pieces of paper in and they would take them out, and also it it was done with the help of the Urim Vetumim that the Kohen Gadol wore. And so somehow, we don't know exactly how it worked, but that was divine guidance of what to pick and where each tribe should be and who should get each one. So, are you going to say that in every case where you're going to divide an estate through a lottery, that also has to be done with a receptacle? You can't just take 3 sticks, but you have to use a receptacle, and you have to do it by Urim V'Tumim. You're going to go find Urim V'Tumim every time. There is no more Urim V'Tumim. We don't have Kohen Gadol. So what are we going to do now? So then we can never make a lottery? So this is not true, right? We're not going to. If you're going to really compare it to that was different. The original division of the land of Israel was done in this miraculous way. But it doesn't make sense that we're going to require that in every case that we divide an estate. And so therefore, that is not the best derivation. So Amar Rav Asher, some texts have Ela Amar Rav Asher, Pahu Ana'ad Kasaiti Lahadadeh, Gamri Umakni Umaknu Lahadadeh. Rav Asher gives a different explanation for how this lottery works. It's through the benefit or the satisfaction that each brother agrees that we will listen to each other, and whatever happens, right, whatever you get, and don't be upset. That through that satisfaction, they're getting something out of the system, so they fully transfer ownership to the other. In other words, they all agree at the beginning, here's A, B, and C, and we're gonna take one first. Whichever name we pick, that will get A, and we all agree to it. And because it's a very good system, and that way they won't be fighting later on. Because we know that we all agreed to the division, and then who gets which one is random based on the lottery. So since they get benefit from, so you need a transaction. You have to give and get. All the brothers get something. They get the benefit. That they all agreed to this, and they know that the decision will be fair, and so because they receive that benefit, they give over, they transfer ownership of the rest of the lands to the other brothers through that, and so that's the mechanism by which this works. Itamar shene achin shechalku uba lehen ach memedinat hayam Rav amar Batra machloket ushmuel amar mekamesin. Now we have a case where 2 brothers, their father died, and they split the inheritance equally. Good. But then there's a surprise 3rd brother that came from overseas. They didn't know about this brother, so they did not take him into account when they divided the estate. But lo and behold, they have a long-lost brother. But now, what happens? They have to somehow redivide the land that they already divided in half. They have to divide it in thirds. So how do they do that? 2 opinions. Rav says that the division that they made is null and void. They made the division thinking that there's only 2 brothers. Didn't take the other one in mind. So now it's null and void, and they do it all over again. They start again. Shmuel, however, says, no, the division they made stays, and it's just that each brother will have to take 1/3 of his section and give it to the long-lost brother. So the first brother and second brother each take 1/3, and then they will all have 1/3. So they each have to take off something from their own share, but the division between the first 2 brothers remains the same. Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman le Rav de'amar batla machloket al ma hadar dina ele me'ata hane be'telata dekaimi ve'azul be'tere minayhu uflug hachen ameh de batla machloket. So Rava asked Rav Nachman, according to Rav, who says that when the 3rd brother comes, the original division is null and void. So that means that the law goes all the way back, right? The verdict is undone, and it's done. We have to redo it all the way back from the beginning. So according to this, if we have a similar case where you have 3 people who are in a partnership together, and the law about partnership is, unless otherwise specified, you can't force the other partners to remain in the partnership. Anytime they want out, they can divide it and say, we are leaving. If it's 2 people, if it's 3 people. Now here it's 3 people in the original partnership. 2 of them decide they want to divide the partnership, and the 3rd one is not around. So they go to a court and they divide it, and each one takes 1/3, and then the other 1/3 will be for the 3rd guy eventually when he shows up. So would you say that when the 3rd partner shows up, and says, I don't like this division, would you say here also that the division is null and void and they have to redo the whole thing? It seems to be a similar case, but that should not be, because back in Baba Metzia, we learned that as long as the 2 partners, even without the 3rd partner there, as long as they do it properly in front of a court, their division is a valid division. So how can we reconcile what Rav said, that in this case where the 3rd third brother that they don't know about, and the division is invalid when he comes. How do you reconcile that with this case of the partnership where they do it without the third brother, and yet here we say it is valid? So Rav Nachman answered, Hachi hashta, are these cases comparable? Hatam nechiti adata debe telata me'ikara. Hacha la nechiti adata debe telata me'ikara. They entered into the process of dividing it with all three in mind, right? The two knew of the existence of the third partner, right, and knew what his rights were, and they said, okay, we don't need his agreement to it, right, because it's a partnership and we're allowed to get out, and therefore we are dividing it on behalf of ourselves and on his behalf. So they divide it properly to begin with. Whereas here in the case of the inheritance, they divided it only thinking that there's two brothers. They did not have in mind that third brother. So that's why it's null and void, but they didn't divide it into three, and they didn't even know of his existence, and they didn't have him in mind when they divided the estate. So that's why you have to do it all over again. So we could reconcile Rav with that law from Baba Metziah. And now a question against Shemuel. Amar le Rav Papa le Abaye li Shmuel damar mekamesin le memra dekam dina. So now Rav Papa asks Abaye, according to Shemuel, who says that the division between the original two brothers remains, and they just shave off a part of each of their divisions, and brother A gives 1/3 and brother B gives 1/3 of what he has, and then they give that to the third brother. So that means that the verdict stands. Whatever they divided stays, and they just have to then give a section of each of their divisions. According to that, Veha Rav u'Shmuel damre tarvaihu kor b'shloshim ani mocher lecha yachol lachzor bo afilu b'se'ah ha'acharona. So does that mean, according to Shmuel, that a verdict remains? But we have another source that we've learned a few times already, that Rav and Shmuel both agree that if someone says, I'm going to sell you a cord of grain for 30 selah, that's the price, and then he is measuring it out, each se'ah by se'ah. So either party can change their minds, even if he already measured out 29 of the 30, but because he said, I'm going to sell you 30 as one big number, so either party can change their minds in the middle. What you see here is that before the division is over, it's not final, and one can change their minds. And so that should apply here also, where they divided this thing into two pieces, but not into three for the brother that wasn't around, meaning that it's not yet measured out. So this seems to be equivalent if it's not measured out. In the case of the grain, he said that you can, and either party can change their minds. The verdict is not done. You can go all the way back to the beginning and say, you know what, forget about it. So we should apply the same thing here in the case of inheritance and say, well, since it was not fully measured out and divided with the third brother, then the original division should be null and void. That's the question. The question comes from the beginning. We're going to quote the rest of it anyway. That kol bishloshim se'ah besela ani mocher lecha rishon rishon kana. If the seller says, I'm selling you one cord for 30, and that is, and then he delineates one se'ah per selah. Since he said one se'ah per selah, once he measures out one se'ah, it's already sold. Second se'ah, it's already sold, and they cannot renege on their deal. But that's only because he makes it into 30 small transactions. So we still have the question from the big number, as long as it's one sale, before it's finally measured out, they can renege on the deal. So the same should be true regarding the inheritance. Before they finally divide it, then it should not be a final verdict, and they should go back and redivide it. And the answer to that is Hatam Abud Rabbanan Mileta Denichale La Mocher Venichale La Lokeach. This is essentially the law is the case of inheritance. That once it's divided, that's it. The division is sale. And really, from the letter of the law, that would mean that once you dole out 15 of them or 20 of the se'ah, really that should be a final sale. However, in the case of the grain, the rabbis made a takana. They made an institution that is beneficial for both the buyer and the seller, since both the buyer and the seller would like the option of reneging before the final measure is doled out. So the rabbi said, okay, you both want it, it's good for both of you, then fine. Why is it good for both of them? Because they want to keep their options open. In case the price suddenly goes up right in the middle while they're doing that, somebody announces announces that the price went up, then the seller is going to renege and say, forget it, I can get another price. Or if in the middle, while he's doling out, his price goes down, the buyer wants to have the option to renege, and then he can go buy somewhere else or renegotiate the deal. And so both the buyer and the seller like that, having their options open, because it could take time by the time you go and get the storage and dole it out. So therefore, the rabbi said, in that case, you know what? You can renege and the verdict is not final. You can go all the way back to the beginning. But the law of inheritance, that is the basic letter of the law, that once you make a verdict, even though the third brother didn't even come yet, still you made a division, that division stands, and then you adjust it for the third brother. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.